Morning, everybody. How you doing? It is a Wednesday here in Minnesota. It's cold, near zero. It's snowing, winds blowing. It's a chilly night last year in this old building, but to live in the castle you live in, right? So I hope everybody enjoyed that last episode about the wars and how much we have to be thankful for in spite of COVID and some of the stressors that we're dealing with. Uh, it's funny how we have more depression now than ever, and yet we live simpler, more supported lives than anybody in the history of time. The American teenagers never had an easier life than anybody in the history of this planet, and yet they're one of the most miserable uh, groups that have ever existed. They have no direction, no purpose. The lack of struggle gives them a lack of identity and soul. And when you have struggle, you have a clear light at the end of the tunnel, something you're working towards as a people, as a person, as a family. And without struggle, we struggle to find purpose. It's really hard. I see it in my own stepkids, and I see it in their friends, and I see it in my cousins, my nieces and nephews, I should say. But I think I felt that war episode was necessary because it moved me and it angered me. And jazz is not in isolation from these events; it was happening simultaneously, which makes it part of the backdrop. It makes it part of why the Europeans so readily and openly accepted jazz. They knew struggle. They knew of the struggle of the black man in America, and this music was tangibly powerful. And I think it's important to once in a while illustrate some of that color, some of that background noise that's filtering through those horns. And it's not just the black treatment in America. It's when the black man goes to Europe, he sees how differently he's treated there. It makes him more resentful when he comes home, whether you're a soldier or a musician. But today's episode, I'm going to switch gears almost completely. I'm going to do something that's surely about the joys of jazz. And jazz is such a broad in industry. It's such a huge palette. And there's so much that's happened over the course of decades that I think for a lot of people who are beginners or even somewhat deeper into the levels, it's hard to know where innovation comes from. It's hard to hear a record and understand the context that it's in and what else was happening around it. And I know for years I listened to Fifth Catholic Rectus by Charles Mingus without having any insight into how trend setting and groundbreaking that was for 1956 at Atlantic Records. They were doing some pretty out there stuff ahead of the curve. Jimmy Joffrey, whose Tangents and Jazz record, there was a 10-inch before it too, I didn't grab, but Joffrey's doing some pretty off the wall, fantastic stuff that are the early uh, antecedents of the avant garde and free jazz. There's dissonance, there's rhythmic chaos at times. And I think a lot of that stuff's hard to put into place when your discography collection is small, when you're just reading what people write. You know this record might be important, but you don't necessarily know the landscape around it and how ahead of the time it was. Was it really kind of behind the times? Even Miles Davis's innovations, when you know enough about the surrounding landscape year by year by year by year, you realize that Miles is never really at the forefront of any of this stuff. He's always 6 months to a year to several years behind the actual innovators, and he's just making them popular with the success of his Columbia contract and the exposure that brings him. Even going back to Birth of the Cool, which was fairly overlooked when it was made. It wasn't until Columbia was having success with Sketches of Spain and Kind of Blue that Capitol said, "Oh, we should reissue that Birth of the Cool stuff." And Birth of the Cool was interesting. It was a known net, I believe. I think it was a 9-piece, maybe a 10. I think it was a 9-piece. I'm pretty sure. Jerry Mulligan was a lead uh, instigator of what was happening there, along with Gil Evans, along with Lee Konitz, along with J.J. Johnson. A lot of people were there being part of that, in addition to what Miles Davis was bringing to the table. But innovation is such a tricky thing. It takes a lot of scope and a lot of landscape witnessed to recognize the anomalies. That piece of landscape there is so phenomenal because it's so unique for what else surrounds it. Something like Devil's Tower in Wyoming, that large prominence that sticks up, what, 2,000 feet or no, I think it's 2,000 meters. It's a pretty tall stack from a volcanic cone that the surrounding landscape has eroded away, and it's just this big prominence in Wyoming called Devil's Tower. For those of you in Europe who aren't familiar with it, you should Google it. Maybe I'll even try to put a picture up of it. But it's a cool prominence. But it stands out so much because it's so isolated in the landscape that it's in. And jazz has lots of that, but it's very hard to hear it or know it when you do hear it without a lot of background filler having been witnessed and heard and listened to. And the chronology, it all needs to be grasped to understand if something is truly innovative or more just following innovations that are happening. And part of the joys of jazz are the moments where it throat grabs you. And this is going to be called a mini throat grabber. There's only a couple of throat grabbers here I'm going to show you, but this stuff moved me yesterday. And first and foremost, I want to show you Serge Chaloff is a wonderful baritone sax player. He's from the Boston area. He's affiliated with West Coast Cool. He was part of the Woody Herman group on the West Coast, part of the Four Brothers sax section. And this initially was Stan Getz and Herb. Oh, I'm forgetting his name now. One of the guys is kind of more obscure. Al Cohn takes Stan Getz's place at one point. Zoot Sims. He's a pretty well-renowned sax section in the Woody Herman second herd that was called the Four Brothers. And they do a few recordings together as that. One on Vic, that's outstanding, which is an RCA subsidiary. And then they do various recordings with two or three of them. Rarely do all four get together. But Chaloff, of course, was the baritone on that, bringing that rich, deep, low tonality. The baritone's a special horn. Jerry Mulligan, of course, makes it famous. Cecil Payne, Leo Parker. There's other great players of the baritone. But Serge Chaloff is a special player. And unfortunately, he had a bad drug problem and a bad alcoholic problem. And he was kind of a prankster and was often in trouble with hotels, like a rock star almost. And having won several poll awards, he would often, when he got challenged by the hotel saying, "You did this," he would say, "How dare you? I won the last two jazz polls at a downbeat. Don't you know who I am?" kind of thing. And it worked most of the time, according to Al Cohn and Zoot Sims and the other guys that were around Serge Chaloff. He was a character, but he definitely would put the pain into the needle. And whether or not it helped him become the interesting player that he became, that's open for debate. Drugs can certainly give you a sense of direction and pull, and maybe even create almost a need and a compulsion that gives you that direction. But that's neither really here nor there. But the other really interesting component here is Richard Twardzik. He's a pianist, again, a bad heroin addict. I think he's also from the Massachusetts area. And Twardzik dies very young, and Chaloff follows him not much longer after that. They both die quite young. But Twardzik's a fantastic, brilliant, innovative, creative genius, Twardzik is. Dick Twardzik, Richard Twardzik, you see it both ways. And he ends up on the West Coast mostly. He plays with Chet Baker a while. And I think he ends up overdosing in Europe on tour with Chet Baker. They found him keeled over in his room. And he was only like 23, if memory serves. Like, he was a young guy, Twardzik, when he died. But he was so brilliant. He was so creative. He was so innovative. It was a really interesting player with a dynamic future that got cut very short. He has a couple things at Pacific Records, some with Chet's. He's a thing or two on his own that are definitely worth seeking out. I love Richard Twardzik's stuff. But one of the cool things about jazz is as you broaden your horizons, as you broaden that landscape and you take in more of those surroundings, as you move forward and learn more and more and more, broaden your escapes more and more and more, when you go back to stuff you used to listen to a year, 2, 4, 5, 6, 10 years ago, suddenly that record's place within the landscape has shifted for you. You can hear whether it's more banal and not as exciting as you thought it was, or if it's even more exciting because you're like, wow, this is really fantastic for the time frame that this is in, And boy, these guys are really setting the pace. I was listening to that Kenny Clark record yesterday, Cleek on Savoy, and John Laporta's on there, and Donald Byrd. And Bird's great, but Laporta's the one that's really killing it. And perhaps that explains why his photo graces the cover of what's a Kenny Clark record. It's John Laporta's face on the cover. And my friend Scott Baldwin said, Rice could have played an issue on that, which is possible. Levinsky wasn't definitely shy of being a racist, but they've definitely put a lot of black men on their album covers. All the same, Laporta was definitely a key element on that record. It's a really brilliant record for its time, and more interesting than a lot of what Savoy was doing in 55, 56. Peppermint mocha coffee, courtesy of my wife. Yum. So I was listening. I busted this the Fable of Mabel yesterday. This is on Storyville. It's actually his second session as a leader. His first one is also on Storyville, the 10-inch era. And the first one was with Boots Mazzulli, an Italian East Coast guy. He's also from Massachusetts. And Boots and Serge play together quite a lot. I think they played together like on a big band at some point. And Serge does record in the 40s, in the 78 era, with numerous different players. So he has quite a legacy prior to the LP era. But in the LP era, he really only has 5 sessions, I think. These 2 on Storyville. Then he goes to Capitol and makes, am I right, Capitol? Yeah, Blue Surge and Boston Blow Up. And the Boston Blow Up is one of those Stan Kenton Presents Capitol Jazz records, which is probably the best jazz Capitol does. And then he makes that one record on Vic with the 4 brothers. So it's a really limited body of work in terms of what you can collect on vinyl today, unless you collect 78s. My friend Scott also said that the Mosaic box set fills in a lot of that missing stuff with Ralph Burns. And boy, I wish I could remember some of the other guys. I was reading all these names last night, and life happens and I've forgotten some of the information I was looking at. But anyway, I listened to this yesterday, and boy, did it just knock me on my ass. It grabbed me by the throat. And I'm like, well, there's a throat grabber. And an hour or so later, I had a second throat grabber. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do a 2 throat grab episode. People have asked for some throat grabbers. People have been clamoring, give me some throat grabbing. I need that throat grab. And let me tell you what. This Fable of Mabel track, which is written by Richard Twardzik, okay? And it's a big group on here. It's a 9-piece. And if you think The Birth of the Cool is cool, you haven't really heard the cool yet, because this is cool. And you got Charlie Mariano on the alto sax, who anybody who's watched this channel for any length of time knows how big a Charlie Mariano fan I am. I think he's outstanding. His work at Bethlehem is top of the mark. And Mariano's also a Massachusetts guy. And the Boston jazz scene is dominated by white cats. There's a few brothers that make it mixed in, but we've talked about Boston before. It's a different city. For all its liberal tendencies and left-wing politics, it's still a very racist climate. Anti-Irish, which there was a lot of, and the blacks never really even established themselves in Massachusetts, in part because the manufacturing industries weren't the same in Boston as they were in the Rust Belt cities, as they were in New York and New Jersey. So the blacks never really got a thick population in Boston in the same way, and those that went there weren't really received or welcomed. But there's still a great jazz legacy in Boston. It's just mostly the great white cats, a lot of who ended up on the West Coast. Of course, George Wein, the great concert promoter who brought us the Newport Jazz Festival. He had a label and a club in Boston called Storyville, and that's what label this is on, Storyville. And this is the 10-inch, near the end of the sequence. I think it's 317. There's about 21 or 22 Storyville 10 inches, and they're all fantastic, by the way. I have every one of them now, including the Sidney Bechet ones, which I didn't have for a while. I had the entire run on Storyville, including the 20 or so LPs as well. It's a great little label that's incredibly under the radar. So when you hear him on Capitol, I say on Blue Surge, which is a pretty expensive record on Capitol. It's one of the more expensive Capitol jazz records there is. Serge Chaloff's Blue Surge. It's got a blue jacket hanging on a coat hanger. That's a great record, but it's kind of straightforward and within the lines because it's on Capitol. This is on Storyville. This is George Wein kind of saying, I'm going to take the reins off, go which way you want to go. And I don't want to get this episode demonetized, so I'm going to try to play you bits of this song in little tidbits to give you some illustration of what I'm talking about. But let's listen to even this intro here. It's so dynamic. Right there. Mingus, Miles Davis, Wayne Shorter's quintet later on. A lot of the dissonant and the edgy and sounds that kind of have some tension in them are being already shoved down our throats right off the bat. And there's Twardzik in the background. Oh, man. There's elements of Pink Panther Mancini, elements of the avant-garde, some Jimmy Joffrey. On the saxophones, we have Avardi Haratune, Nick Capizzuto, Gene D'Estacio on trombone, Mariano and Chaloff on baritone and alto, Per Pomeroy's on the trumpet. And this is just such fantastic composition and arrangement. You need to listen to this yourself. It breaks down into a wonderful little vamp with a pocket and a groove. Oh, and then comes that baritone of Serge, and it's rich, it's saccharine, it's slinky as the Pink Panther as it walks down and waltzes around you in a provocative manner. He's not being coy. He's being pretty disastrous flirtation. You know, I mean, he's on the edges of where this can be. And there's filler around him that's crashing and sonically incredible. And what you end up having here is a bridge, literally, from what Ellington was doing on his kind of riskiest stuff to what a guy like Mingus was going to start doing in 56, 57 with Pithecanthropus erectus and the Clown and A Foggy Day and all that stuff that Mingus starts doing. This is ahead of that. The tempo just changes. All of a sudden it bursts out the gate. It's just fantastic. There's nothing in jazz that I've heard as I searched my memory in analog annals yesterday that can really compare to this in 1954 that I can think of. Jimmy Joffrey's the closest I can get to with his 10-inch and 12-inch. And if I remember, Tangents and Jazz is probably more experimental than the 10-inch was. And that's a great record, but that's 55, 56. This is 54. And again, it's a clear indicator. Man, that's marvelous. That's so cool. Twardzik's just laying it. It's so the avant-garde that's to come a decade later. Man, it's a cool track. It really is. There's tempo changes, there's key changes, there's rhythmic pulsing that changes. It's not stuck in one thing. It very much is these extrapolated parts that somehow manage to lace vine and sinew together to create this Frankenstein of a track that somehow is cohesive. It's very creative. It's very innovative. The band is tight. It's cerebral. Little Gil Evans, Sketches of Spain kind of arrangement with the horns there. It's a sonic masterpiece. It goes places. It challenges convention. And then the outro is melancholic. And Twardzik needs to be given a lot of recognition here. This is brilliance. And there goes Serge. Yeah, see what I'm saying? So you can find the innovations in the weirdest places. And there's a lot of Grasham Moncourt and Jackie McLean and just edgy Ornette Coleman that's to come, that this is preceding by a good stretch. Again, 1954, that song happened. And you can just needle drop it. Sit. I'll drop it again, see what happens. It's shaped. It's functional. It's arranged. It's almost got a score sensibility to it, like Black Saint and the Sinner Lady by Mingus, which comes out, what, 63? A decade later? And so to waltz between these type of patterns and the sonic diversity of some of these other parts, it really shows you the modernity and the sophistication of jazz, even by 54. And I've often said that the White Cats are often more cerebral, intellectual in their approach, and sometimes lacking the direction of sheer struggle, trying to overcome my anxiety, my pain, my fear, my doubts, my anger, and all those things that the black player is processing. The white player is often left more to be cerebrally advanced and intellectual, because he's not just processing his pain by playing a comfortable song he knows and improvising that emotion, that a great Lockjaw Davis would be doing. That even a guy like Horace Silver is doing. Some of those black players are just, I gotta get this off my chest. I don't really have time to think about complex arrangements. I just need to, oh, fuck. It was a tough night last night. Doesn't leave you a lot of room to need intellectual composition. Not to say it's not done by black guys, because of course it is, Mingus being the primary example. But Mingus's improvisation and his composition are very interwoven in that fury and that anger that is very socially, politically conscious. Mingus was not a happy man, and a lot of it was because of how we felt about being as a black man in America. It was not something he was very thrilled about. And he didn't mind being black, but he didn't like how America felt about that blackness. And it's something that's on his sleeve and at the edge of his tongue at all times in Mingus's career, and it's why he's so volatile. The art almost isn't enough. I get to say a lot of what I need to say, but I still got razor sharp edges. Go ahead, cross that line, find out what happens. And he's equal racially opportunistic in terms of who he'll abuse and punch. I'll pull a gun on you, black or white. I'll punch you, black or white. Don't matter. When Ellington has to kick you out of his band for assaulting Juan Tizzle, and there's some conflict there. Some people say Juan Tizzle went after Mingus first with a switchblade, although he was baited into it. But Juan Tizzle stays in the band and wasn't Ellington's band forever. And Mingus was only there for a short time and was given the boot. But again, there's some pretty obscure names on here. The Vardy Haratunian sounds like a East South Asian name. Vardy Haratunian. But Nick Capozzuto is obviously Italian. Gene D'Estaccio is obviously Italian. Charlie Mariano's Italian. Ray Oliveri. And then, of course, Dick Twardzik, Jimmy Zatano's Italian. There's a lot of Italians in Boston, obviously. And then Serge Chaloff and Herb Pomeroy. So there's some kind of obscure names on there. But I tell you, this is a great record. And even these other tracks have some wonderful swing. Nice modern, fits in with the time. Let's give her a quick flip. Again, you get some elements of Ellington and the swing roots of the music. There's also a lot of very much modernity, some elements of bebop. And Chaloff was one of the most innovative bebop players there was. He was amazing on that baritone. And the black players all gave him lots of credit. Chaloff had a place in the kingdom. And, man, fantastic stuff. And again, it's a great Bert Goldbach cover. And Bert Goldbach's one of the great graphic designers in the history of all music. And jazz, of course, led graphic design in the dawning of the LP era, 50, 52, 54, 56. He's one of the most important, along with David Stone Martin, working for Norman Granz over at Clef. So what else I want to show you right now is I was so enthralled listening to this record. And of course I was making his trading card, Serge Chaloff. And I've been trying to play some of the cats I've been making cards for while I'm making the card, just to get in that headspace. And I decided to play his next record, which was Blossom Blow Up. And I came across a ballad of a song called What's New? And this is a much different lineup on this one. It looks like Dick Twardzik might still be on some of this. But it's a much smaller group. But there's some baritone balladry going on in this that is the dreamiest of dreamscapes. And again, it grabbed me by the throat in several places. And I don't want to get this taken down. So I'll turn it up when it comes to it. I'm trying to see who's on this record. I was impatient yesterday. Oh, right there. Listen to that. There's some guttural utterances that he uses the baritone, and it just will strike you in your soul. Fantastic record once again. Some really moving up-tempo numbers. And again, Capitol doesn't have a large body of great jazz. They got a lot of good jazz, a lot of safe jazz, and a lot of that stuff has a great place and belongs in your collection. Don't get me wrong. If it says Stan Kenton Presents Jazz, that's some of the best Capitol stuff there is. But again, I don't want to get this taken down, so I'm going to kind of leave it. Vibrato, Dexter Gordon's sensibility and feel. Hearing him on this ballad was just an eye-opener. And again, these are records I've heard a dozen times, both of them. But sometimes it takes a break. You listen to something for a while, you fill in a bunch of other gaps, and you come back to something and go, man, this guy was the real deal. He was a real leader and innovator and was one of the movers and shapers of the sounds of jazz in the early and mid-'50s. And so what I would recommend to you is listen to what's new from this record, where you don't have to have me worry about turning the volume up and down. Just sit there with some headphones and listen to what's new and listen to his wonderful balladry. It's storytelling of the highest degree with a great degree of emotional context and sorrow and displacement, searching, seeking for a home. And even as white cats, we all need a place to belong, something that we connect with. And there's some real desperation and longing for a sense of belonging, I feel, in Chaloff here. Man, there's some great stuff happening in the background there. Again, I'm going to keep it down. And Daisy's trying to play with my turntable, which is not appreciated, Daisy. I fell on the ice yesterday, banged my elbow up pretty good. Words going to be really sore today, and I'm not too bad, all things considered. Although I did take my husky out for a walk a couple hours after that, and her tendency to pull my arm or my neck and my shoulder left something to be desired. Walking a husky, it's a bit like trying to walk a tractor trailer truck. When it decides it wants to stop, you stop, even in your tracks. And if she decides she wants to bolt, you better hope one of your feet is on solid ground. Because if you're on some slippery stuff, that's the end of that business right there. But she wasn't why I fell. I fell because I was going out to get her from the pen, and the stairs off our patio were icy, and I fell, hit my back and my neck, and slid down the stairs. And because I was just grounded, I didn't have a hoodie or a jacket on, which makes that ground that much colder. I didn't have a hoodie, nothing, just bare sleeve, t-shirt. But thankfully today, it doesn't look as bad as me and my wife feared. We thought that sucker was going to be bruised up and blue, but hopefully I got enough muscle mass for my days of being in the gym and playing sports that maybe I'm not in too bad a shape for a guy who's 50. Anyway, Chaloff is an amazing guy, and it's fun to do a little bit of a throat grabber, even though it's kind of a shorter, little abbreviated one. It's fantastic stuff, and if you like what Chaloff's doing here, I recommend you get this Tangents and Jazz record, because it's definitely also very much ahead of its time, and very much an essay in dissonance and creativity and playing with the sounds of the music. See, that's got some Ornette Coleman to it right there. That kind of jagged, raggedy, free moving. A lot of jazz is moving like a stream that bubbles. This feels like water falling down on rocks. Like it keeps cascading over little rocky outcroppings, and there's no real stream. It's jagged, it's dissonant, it's exciting, and it feels very vital and alive. But it's not something you want to relax to necessarily. For me, the avant-garde is not that anymore. But you can hear pulsing, the creativity, the dissonance, the sharpness. There's some more traditional stuff on there as well. But trust me when I say that record has some pretty brilliant stuff that wasn't really part of the landscape when it was made. And again, that Fables of Mabel, pull that up and listen to it. So it's a tough 10-inch to find. So I'm not expecting a bunch of you to go out there and buy that today. There's probably a few copies out there somewhere on Discogs or eBay. But Chaloff's work is pretty tough to come by, especially those two Storyville 10 inches. The Japanese did press them both, probably as 10-inch and 12-inch. Different companies will do different things with that. But Chaloff deserves a lot of recognition. And he was gone so quickly that it's easy to kind of avoid and miss his career. But as you dig deeper and find more and more artists, you'll find the place where he belongs. And he's as important as some of the guys like Mulligan and Joffrey. And had he remained with us longer, his name would certainly have more ring to it now. Sadly, that wasn't the case to be. And again, Dick Twardzik, Richard Twardzik as well, is another name where we need to be like cognizant of how brilliant some of these young kids were. And again, the white kids of this era were more likely to come from music conservatories, have had great music programs in their high schools and colleges and universities. They're much more likely to have well-trained teachers and high-quality instruments, better recording studios. So there was a lot of room and a lot of reason for the whites to be leading the innovation, aside from just the dynamics of the black man's personal experience, saying, I just want to scream into my horn right now. I don't got time for thinking. I just want to vent. So that's one aspect of it. But the other aspect of it is the whites had so much more available to them. And with less stuff on their mind to deal with, it left more room for them to be creative and innovative and to drive and push the boundaries of the music, which in this case, at this point, the blacks in some cases will start following what the whites are innovating. And it depends on kind of where your headspace is at. A guy like Hank Mobley never really branches into the avant-garde or dissonance. He stays in his lane. That's where he belongs. But guys like Wayne Shorter and Lee Morgan and Jackie McLean, these guys obviously were hearing what was happening with the dissonance from Ornette Coleman to John Coltrane to Charlie Mingus to guys like Serge Chaloff and Jimmy Joffrey. These guys were innovators. And there's no question that Ornette Coleman and John Coltrane had heard Jimmy Joffrey, had heard Serge Chaloff. And these white records do sell better and just get better distribution than the black labels do. And of course, when Joffrey goes to Capitol, that gives him an immense pull and spread. And as well with Chaloff. When Chaloff goes to Capitol, suddenly he gets distribution that's national. So black musicians anywhere have a chance to go out and hear what these guys are doing. And they had a big impact on what was to come in the 60s. So 1954, we see some of these kind of West Coast cool cats that are often monikered with that incorrectly, being incredibly innovative, incredibly ahead of the curve, not really having anyone to follow. You're kind of doing Ellington on acid. There were some points on there where I felt like it was Ellington modernized with some Picasso-like monk spacing at times. Some of that spacing in that track was very reminiscent of Monk, who's also, at the same time, he's done his Blue Note sessions. He's doing some of that stuff on Prestige. He's becoming a leading force and a sound of diversification in the canon. So Monk is actually even predating some of this stuff. So Monk's an important figure. And that's one of the things about Monk. Monk predates Mingus even. And Ornette Coleman and all those guys that were doing the avant-garde. Monk is tinkling away. And even Bud Powell at times. But Monk definitely distills it down more into that choppy Picasso modernistic kind of approach. Whereas Powell had the power of Parker and Bebop to be incredibly expressive and virtuistic. And into that mix, you can throw a guy like Herbie Nichols, who was friends with both of them, and it was also a fantastic player who has some of Powell and some of Monk, and obviously his own sounds going on as well. Nichols is a guy that needs to be recognized, and his record at Bethlehem is fantastic. It's a rare record, and his stuff at Blue Note's also fantastic. And the other guy you want to mention here is Elmo Hope. Elmo Hope does some stuff also early in this period that's fitting in with. He's from New York as well, and I've talked to you many times about the New York piano players. And once I get my trading cards done, I think I'm up to about 133 right now, front and back done. Got the fronts done. I gotta do some tweaking on the fronts on some, but the backs are taking time doing the research and fact checking stuff. I did 12 or 13 cards yesterday, which was the most I've done in a day in a while. Life gets in the way, health gets in the way, dogs, cats get in the way. My one cat, Daisy, has started to climb up on my record shelves right below where I'm sitting trying to work on trading cards. And then she'll start mewing at me from way above me. And I made the mistake last week of pulling up a couch pillow and letting her jump on it. And now we're doing that 7 times a day. She'll just jump down, snuggle on my face for a minute, jump off the couch cushion. 5 minutes later, she's mewing. I look up, and there she is again. And it's time to play kitty cat ski jump. And so I got to hold that couch cushion up. And again, with my bum elbow, it's not as much fun. But she don't care. And she doesn't want to make that 8-foot jump down to the ground. That's not really her thing. You know, the concrete's kind of hard. She's kind of a big cat. But she sure doesn't mind jumping into a couch pillow and then kissing my face when she does it. But she always rubs her ass right in my mouth. And then I'll tip her and she'll jump down the floor. I'll get back to making my cards. And then 5 minutes later, it's kitty cat ski jump. And then when I'm done with that, my husky is like shoving her nose in my crotch and putting her little cold black nose in my armpit. And then she'll jump up in with her big old paws that are the size of miniature snowshoes. And she demands my attention. And these two animals, Daisy and Kira, the husky and the big orange cat, they compete for my attention all day long. And so if it's the kid's home from school, and he has the dog in his room, the cat's upstairs sleeping, I can get some work done. But if they're here and demanding my time, things slow down. And then you add into that trying to change records and post records and respond to a few comments and messages and emails. Sometimes it's just hard to get too much focus on getting the cards knocked out. Yesterday was a great day, so hopefully today I can get another 10 done. Y'all be safe. Go to my Patreon page and support the channel if you want. It's always very much appreciated. Thank you to everybody who was doing so. Blessings and a great new year to everybody. There's going to be some new merchandise coming to the store soon. Check out the store now. It'll be in the description below. There's some great merch already there. And again, much love to everybody. Peace and safety. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks.